So today's talk, initially the idea for this talk was based on a forthcoming paper, which I'm writing. We're almost finished with a co-author, Ahmed Mehdi. He used to work for Interfax Energy and then worked for IISS, and now working for NATO Energy, doing energy research there. Obviously now it's quite difficult to say. When you say to people second oil privatization, the people say what privatization? Particularly taking into account the recent sort of not agreements but initial agreements to the takeover, Rosneft's takeover over TNK BP and the BP buying equity. When I ask one of Russian, because during Valda meeting everything was done on the Chatham House rules, so one of the ministers who was basically promoting the idea of privatization and was quite against Rosneft taking over TNK BP, he actually said, well, it is actually privatization. Because BP is buying a large stake in TNK BP, and because of that, it is actually privatization. But I personally think that it's the problem in Russia has always been the case of the two groups, the pro-state and pro-private groups. Some people call them conservatives, some people call them liberals. But it's often difficult to really define, because those camps are not homogeneous. They're quite diverse, also in terms of their outlook. At the moment, the way it looks is that the Russian oil privatization will take place. The government wants to push and go ahead with this and privatize Rosneft completely by the end of 2016, with the government retaining golden share. But I have serious doubts personally that this will actually happen. I think that this Rosneft will remain a type of global NOC, national oil company. And I will explain that some of the problems that the Russian oil industry is facing at the moment perhaps can only be resolved with this type of company, a global NOC. Particularly if you all know that the majority of hydrocarbon resources in the world are controlled by national governments, either directly or through their national oil companies. And when it comes to challenges that the Russian oil industry is facing, I think a number of experts think that it's quite questionable whether private companies, private Russian vertically integrated oil companies, can actually deal with those problems. And also, so the idea now is that we'll see partnerships between Rosneft as a sort of Russian global NOC, together with international oil companies, developing new challenging resources in East Siberia and the Arctic. But at the same time, something which has always been neglected in Russia is that the role of small and medium enterprises. And this idea of promoting small and medium enterprises is not new. The government experts and energy experts, independent experts, have been talking about this for many years, and there was even a letter sent to Igor Sechin in 2010, as far as I remember, by a number of Russian experts, urging him to focus on the development or creating institutional incentives for small and medium companies to help with the development of hydrocarbon resources. Why I'm starting with small and medium companies? Because the problem with the Russian oil sector is the resource base is, as you know, is about to start declining quite rapidly, because over the past 20 years, the development of the Russian oil industry has been based on Soviet inheritance. Geological achievements, infrastructure, the industrial sort of infrastructure around the fields, the export infrastructure. The only achievement, I think, of the post-Soviet period is the construction of East Siberia Pacific Ocean pipeline, which was actually built on Chinese money anyway. So in that respect, the fact is that what we had in the 90s, we had a debate within the government just before the oil industry was privatized, is how that privatization should be done. So the first wave of Russian oil privatization, initially it was all about how to boost production, because there was a massive production decline because of the disintegration of links and also some serious issues with the management of the oil industry in the late 80s, early 90s. And so the idea was, at least the initial idea of the president with the decree of November 92 was, we would partially privatize the oil industry. The government will retain a prominent role. And Igor Shafranik, who was energy minister at the time, argued that we need a national oil company which will have the remaining, which will have the 51% control over the oil industry. And the decree for example, in April '95, one of the ideas was to facilitate the creation or enhancing the role of Rosneft in the oil sector. And however, what I would call it the more conservative, more pro-state approach was promoting. Yeltsin actually didn't settle for that, as you can see on this slide. Rosneft really wanted to operate like at least Shafranik saw it as more as a sort of type of energy ministry type organization, which will be based on Statoil, a national oil company, a Norwegian national oil company, and it will manage the oil industry. As you know as well, in Norway they have no oligarchs in the oil sector. They have no big private oil companies. So it's all mainly state managed by a partially privatized national oil company. However, because there was quite a big disagreement between the liberals and conservatives, Yeltsin tried to find some kind of status quo, and he basically did create Rosneft, but at the same time he was not going to promote complete privatization or more large-scale privatization. He was also at the time was more interested in basically partial privatization of the oil industry. But what happened towards the mid of this, because if you look at this decree, which was passed in 1st of April, and on the first column you can see this is sort of Shafranik's proposal and the outcome. But what happened is that towards the mid-90s, with the rise of the communist movement in Russia, and also the serious problems with regional elites in Russia, which acted as a sort of counter elite in many ways in the relations with the federal government, and because there was basically no civil society, the political institutions were weak. Political parties were, again, not really playing a very prominent role. So the idea for Yeltsin was that the only way he can create some kind of a new institutional base, political institutional base, was to create new owners, the oligarchy groups. And this is one of the reasons why towards the end of his first term in office, he settled for this loans for shares auctions, where most of the people who were participating in those auctions were pre-selected by the government on the basis of their political loyalty. And at the same time, another interesting thing which happened is that Shafranik, of course, resigned in protest. He said, I don't think it's a good idea just to allow vertically integrated oil companies to manage the industry, because they will not be very good at managing the industry. And so what happened is that the more pro-private argument at the time won its day, and by by the sort of between 96, if you look, the period 96, 97, 98, there was privatization, and Rosneft lost a number of its assets, which were used to create also a private company, Sibneft, controlled by Boris Yeltsin's confidant, Roman Abramovich. And so what happened is that, in a way, the sort of the pro-private argument lost its course in the early 2000s, simply because of the transfer pricing, simply because vertically integrated oil companies were not really investing enough, and there was quite a big difference between oil companies which were owned by the banking sort of community, or the so-called financiers, such as Sibneft, such as EUCAS, which was controlled by Menatep, and such as TNK, which was controlled by the consortium of Alpha, Axis, and Renova. At the time, it was just Alpha, and Renova. So, and also there was, on one hand, there were those guys, and on the other hand, there were traditional oil men, such as Vladimir Bogdanchikov of Surgutneftegaz, Vagit Alikperov. Their approach to the oil production was quite different, because the financiers often been accused by oil men that all they're interested in is just extracting easy oil, applying sort of new technologies just to boost production, boost capitalization of companies, because the idea of those guys was to we need to boost capitalization in order to sell the company to a foreign investor. And this is exactly what happened with EUCAS when it was offered to ExxonMobil and to ConocoPhillips when they had negotiations. And also the idea was that EUCAS and Sibneft would be merged together and then would be sold to a foreign company. And also TNK, as you know, they built an alliance with BP and created this company, TNK BP. As you know, the EUCAS affair took place, and that deal never surfaced. And but one problem of the EUCAS period, so often this is misinterpreted, I think, not only in literature or in the media, but also in the expert community, is there are different reasons for the demise of Khodorkovsky. But the main argument, for example, in my book and in our forthcoming working paper, which I'll show you the title at the end, is that the problem there is that when liberals had a meeting with Khodorkovsky, German Gref had a meeting with him and said, we're not happy with transfer pricing. We're not happy that the oil lobby is controlling the parliament, because the parliament at the time, particularly the Committee on Taxation, was controlled by EUCAS. It had, Mr. Dubov, one of the EUCAS managers, was the head of that committee. So what Putin wanted when he came to power, he said, I want a simple taxation system, simple to administer. I want a simple system to administer the oil industry. And I want, and a number of basically the liberal economists who came with him to Moscow came up with a number of a whole package of reforms to make the system more simple to administer. But the problem is that all that legislation which they were supposed to pass was either derailed in the parliament, because the parliament was, like I said, controlled by the oil lobby, or it was changed into such a way that those laws were not really doing any sort of creating really more the system that Putin wanted. So when liberals had a meeting with Khodorkovsky and tried to persuade him to stop transfer pricing, to stop sort of blocking the effort to create a more transparent taxation system, they realized that it's not working, and that's when the Siloviki stepped in and said, "Well, they can't sort this out. We'll sort this out for you." And this basically exactly what happened with the EUCAS affair. That the force was used, coercion was used to persuade to change the change. So there were many ways, many things were achieved as a result of the demise of UCAS. Of course, Rosneft at the time again, because the conservative argument pushed the idea that we need an NOC, we need to boost Rosneft's role in the industry, and the only way we can do this is by giving it more assets. And then there was a talk about joining Gazprom with Rosneft, and then buying Sibneft. And then when the UCAS affair obviously happened, Yugansk-Neftegas, which is the key, as you can see, the key asset now of Rosneft, and was the key asset of UCAS, was taking over. And at the time, it was decided that Gazprom should really deal with gas issues in Russia, and Rosneft should deal with oil issues in Russia. And Sibneft was not really as interesting in terms of its capacity and in terms of what it can generate, in terms of both oil volumes and also in terms of the cash flows and so on and so forth. So Rosneft settled for Yugansk-Neftegas, and Sibneft was, because Gazprom wanted a part of the sort of oil game, it was allowed by Sibneft. Now, of course, as you can see, Rosneft is Yugansk-Neftegas is responsible for over 50% of Rosneft's production. So, another important aspect which I would mention is that also in the early 2000s, the system of two keys was abandoned. Is when the regions had, like I said, because regional elites were so powerful in the 90s, Yeltsin gave a lot of powers to regional authorities in terms of management of the oil industry. And with the decline of the sort of the influence of oligarchs, which in a way actually played a very important role in reintegrating the oil industry and reintegrating Russia politically. I can talk about this, but a big chunk of my book actually deals with that, with the relationship between federal and regional elites, and how big Russian large oil companies helped the federal government to bring those regions back into the federal orbit and reintegrate Russia, both economically and politically. So the two-key system was also abandoned. The two-key system of oil taxation, oil licensing, which the main idea of that system was that if a company wants to operate in a certain field, it would have to get a license, which was jointly approved by the federal government and also a relevant regional authority. So that system was changed. But the problem of I think towards the mid 2000s, there was also realization that with the decline of the resource base and the decline of the sort of Soviet legacy assets in Russia, there need to be new ways how to develop new resources. And at the moment, the way it looks is that the government wanted to go for new projects, for greenfields in East Siberia, wanted to develop the Arctic, oil and gas. But by the way, it's mainly gas there. It's about 70 to 25%, about 70 to 30% ratio. It's mostly gas. But the problem with East Siberian development and the Arctic development is that East Siberia, despite all the excitement, it will not yield the same volumes of oil as, for example, the traditional field, traditional hydrocarbon resource bases, geological provinces, particularly in West Siberia. And some of the large projects which the government defines as East Siberian projects, they actually, geologically, they're linked to West Siberian projects, because most of East Siberian projects are geologically very different. They're very small clusters of hydrocarbons, which are quite difficult to develop. You need to build new infrastructure in very harsh climates. With the Arctic development, I asked one of ExxonMobil's geologists in London when there was a meeting in the Geological Society about how long do you think it's going to take to develop Arctic hydrocarbons. He said, well, up to 40 years commercially. And that's, so all this excitement in the press, make people, gives the wrong impression about that some Arctic development, there will be oil coming from the Arctic in the next couple of years. Nothing is going to happen for at least a decade, and if not longer. So the challenge is that basically the problem with Russian private oil companies, they were giving a chance to manage the industry. They were giving a chance to invest, provide adequate investments. But because of political risks and because of high concentration of ownership, because if you look at the ownership structure of even TNK BP, in BP you have the largest shareholder within, it's a private, former national champion British national champion, but now it's a private corporate entity. So I think it's about 5% is controlled by I think BlackRock fund, which is an American investment fund. And whereas when it comes to Russian ownership, you will see that Alpha is 70% of it is controlled by 3 people. Renova is 70% by 1 person. Access Industry is 70% controlled by 1 person. So because of high concentration of ownership, there is an argument in literature, and one of the academics who taught here, Valery Kryukov, together with Arel Moy, they argued in one of the, I think it was, I forgot the name of the journal, but they argued that because of high concentration of ownership and because of the political risks, private individuals tend not to invest, not to invest in the production of more oil. They just want to maintain high levels of dividends. However, TNK BP is different in that respect because they also invested substantial amounts, and but they also paid the highest dividends. I'll show you, the sort of the how much in terms of this is, by the way, this is a slide. I didn't put it at the end, but the source is Troika Dialogue report, which is now owned by Sberbank, as you know. So what happened is that if you read the Russian news on a regular basis, you'll see that there are fuel shortages. There is some kind of cartel arrangements between Russian private companies when it comes to petroleum markets. By the way, most Russian companies operate as regional monopolies, which means that they often dominate the regional petroleum markets and set prices. And so one of the problems with the oil industry, with the refining industry in Russia, is that the lack of investments in the refining capacity and modernization of refineries. And so one of the arguments again of this sort of pro-state people in the government is that we need a large state-controlled company which will both be sort of the vanguard of East Siberian development, Arctic development, development of upgrading the refineries, modernizing the refining industry, and also making sure that there is no shortage of petroleum products. There have been some changes. There was obviously some tax changes of the tax regimes, as you know, the 6660 tax regime, which will basically, the idea was to promote So the idea was to promote the development and the production of high-end petroleum products instead of heavy mazout type products, bunker fuel type products. So, and also I think one of the dilemmas for the government is that because of the decline of the resource base, there will be decline of fiscal revenues, as you can see on this slide. By the way, this slide is a translation from Russian into English of the Russian Energy Ministry's presentation, which was giving, I think it was in the summer of this year, I think July or June this year. So, and the problem is that you basically have all output decline, you have declining fiscal revenues, you have commercially unviable resource base, which is not interesting to Russian companies to develop those brownfields simply because they're just technically challenging, they're too expensive to develop. And now the idea is to promote a better tax regime, but the problem is that it is still questionable whether the government can afford a new tax regime. But at the same time, again, during the Valda meeting, when we had the meeting with the liberal, the liberal economic branch of the government, all the ministers, they all know that there will be decline of resource base. They all accept it, and also that there will be decline also in revenues from the oil sector. By the way, the oil sector, the oil and gas sector, contribute about 52% of fiscal revenues to the Russian budget. Out of those 52%, about 3 to 5% comes from the gas sector. And one idea is to move the tax burden. One of the arguments of government experts is move the tax burden from the oil industry to the gas sector. But again, that doesn't look that it's actually happening at this stage. So there are lots of problems. And another problem is that there was an interesting study on Arctic development made by Skolkovo Energy Center, saying that the companies that will benefit from Arctic development and from the tax regime, special tax regime for the Arctic, will be Rosneft and IOCs. And if Rosneft is in private hands, it means that the government will actually receive even less from the development of the Arctic. And in a way, it's actually better to keep Rosneft in the hands of the government, because then the government can somehow squeeze more dividends from Rosneft. And another problem which basically happened with Lukoil, I will show you, because in terms of liquids, I mean, Lukoil still, in terms of oil production, Lukoil is the second largest oil producer. But in terms of liquid production, it's it's gone from the second position now to the third position last year, simply because there was a geological mistake with one of the fields, and instead of they spent I don't remember exactly now, I think over $1 billion on bringing that field to commercial production, but because of geological mistake and also some other, I think the mistake in technical approaches, there was a problem with that particular field, and as a result, Lukoil now is losing its sorry, I have to go through this. It's losing its in terms of its output. And this is one of the problems of not only just of Lukoil. It potentially could be this sort of jackpot approach, we call it, of oil companies. I mean, if you look at this slide, you'll see that most of these private companies rely on one field or two projects, hoping that this project will somehow boost their output, and this is. This is basically the projected production in the Russian oil industry, by private companies. But one interesting thing, if you look at the period starting from 2014, and going up to 2020, you see that most of these new fields as well are being developed, will be developed by TNK, BP, or Rosneft, which is also one of the reasons why it makes sense to take control over TNK, BP, because by taking control over TNK, BP, Rosneft solves several problems. It gets access to new fields. It gets access to technology which BP supplied, because BP helped TNK to boost its production by about 30%. This sort of new brownfield revolution, as some experts called it, and also access to gas, because Rosneft is now moving more towards the gas sector, and could potentially, I see in the next few years potentially some sort of battles taking place between Gazprom and Rosneft over how we manage the gas, both domestic gas markets but also foreign gas markets, because when it comes to European markets, you know that they, with the shale gas revolution, resulted in America, resulted in a considerable increase of new sources of gas, because all the gas, liquefied natural gas, which was supposed to go to the United States, is now going elsewhere, particularly Qatar LNG, and that had two issues. The one issue is it created some kind of pressure on oil-linked gas prices, which Gazprom is using in its deals with European consumers, but also in terms of the long-term contracts. And one of the arguments of the so-called independent gas producers in Russia, such as Novatek, but also Rosneft, is that Russia should choose volumes over prices when it comes to European gas markets. So we need to supply more gas. We need to, for us, it's probably a good idea to supply cheap gas, because if we supply cheap gas to European markets, then we will undermine LNG supplies to Europe. We will undermine renewables. We will undermine any sort of talk about shale gas development. We will also boost European economic recovery, and we will also boost future demand of gas, and also not only retain our role in the gas sector, but also increase our role in the gas sector. So this is so I see potentially Rosneft emerging as sort of a serious force in the gas sector as well in Russia, both in Russia and also abroad, and also because now Rosneft has serious partnerships with companies such as Exxon, Eni, Statoil, and BP. It could use different strengths of those companies in order to boost its role in international markets. As you know, that Rosneft is buying some interesting assets that TNK BP has in Latin America and in other regions, but also it could rely on the strengths of some companies in terms of their trading arms in Europe, both in terms of oil sales and also gas and petroleum products as well. So this is something which is again, this you can see on this. This is from Rosneft's presentation just very recently, showing that particularly that key there, that table in the top corner is interesting. It shows the combined reserve base, the oil production, over 4 million barrels, gas production. So it's in a way it's a very smart move, I think, on part of Igor Sechin in particular, and also the fact that I think for the first time, this is something which we're writing in our papers, that for the first time I think in Russian history, the so-called conservatives or siloviki provide a new channel of access for the Kremlin to Western corporate world, because before this basically the reemergence of Rosneft, the people who really provided channel between the Kremlin and the West, or Western financial institutions, were Russian liberal economists, because they're the ones who negotiate with IMF. They're the ones who had access to the Western banking community. Whereas now, with the emergence of Rosneft has actually become a new channel. And from a political point of view, I think siloviki now can also provide an important institutional base for the Kremlin, which, for example, liberal economists provided in the 90s to Boris Yeltsin. Liberal economists together with the oligarchs. And now we have a completely new configuration where the President Putin, or whoever is going to succeed him, I have serious doubts that he's going to stay in power for 2 terms, maybe even questionable, maybe for 1 term. But the Kremlin can rely now both both domestically and internationally on so-called liberal camp and the conservative camp, because those 2 camps both have very serious exposure to the Western corporate and financial institutions. When it comes to basically this is our forthcoming paper. That's its title, and of course in this talk I cannot cover everything. But one interesting aspect, of course, something which about Russian equity market, because privatization didn't really make sense to privatize proper privatization, not selling a stake to a Western IOC, because that's not really sort of like some kind of auction or so on and so forth. It's really an exchange of assets. So because equity market is depressed and Russian oil companies are undervalued, I think this is one of the arguments that Igor Sechin used against Medvedev-Dvorkovich sort of agenda, saying that what's the point of us privatizing now? And then Putin came up with an idea that actually, well, Rosneftegas can take part in privatization. Rosneftegas is a holding company which controls 74% in Rosneft, but now it will sell part of its stake in Rosneft to BP. So basically everything was against privatizing Rosneft, both in terms of the challenges that the Russian oil industry is facing with the development of new fields in East Siberia and the Arctic, both in terms of the fiscal issues, both in terms of the failures of private companies to really manage the industry properly, and also to really boost production. But something I would like to say about small and medium companies now is, if you look at the United States, of course the legal regimes, the way that the licensing procedure, of course the political regime is very different to Russia. But in the United States, small and medium companies have been responsible for over 45% of oil output. In Russia, it's between 3 to 4%. In the 90s, Russian small and medium companies were responsible for about up to 12% of national oil output. But again, there were political and economic reasons for the decline of the role of small and medium companies in Russia, because in the majority of cases in the 90s, small and medium companies were created by regional elites, which use them as an institutional or financial institutional base of their rule in the regions. And also often sometimes criminal groups created some of the small companies in the 90s. So what happened in the 2000s and late 90s is that the growth in the industry in many ways was achieved also when Russian vertically integrated oil companies started buying the smaller companies, because for them it was the easiest way to, instead of investing in new fields or applying sort of new technological approaches to oil production, it was easy for them just to buy a small company with a very interesting license. So this was one thing. And second thing is that indirectly the Kremlin promoted this process of big oil companies taking over the small companies, because it wanted to displace, remove, or completely sort of destroy the financial base of Russian regional elites, their traditional financial bases. So new bases which were built in Russia now are based mainly on the sort of vertical power. So that's basically the main reason for the decline of the role of small and medium companies. However, this could change if the government decides to introduce specific measures when it comes to the development of Russian oil output. Because at the end of the day, some of the small fields, some of the brown fields, some of the sort of idle wells, which Russian vertically integrated oil companies are not interested in developing because they don't make commercial sense for them at all. But for small and medium companies, because the infrastructure is there, which is in most cases was built in Soviet times, but obviously is owned by, controlled by these vertically integrated oil companies. So there is one problem. It's the problem of access to that infrastructure, and there are also problems of tax incentives, giving tax incentives to small and medium companies in terms of making it commercially viable for them to start producing. Particularly when I interviewed a number of representatives for small and medium companies, asking them how much can you, how quickly that will it take for you if the tax incentives are right. How long will it take for you to boost production? They said, well, we can boost production by 1 million barrels within 3 to 5 years, and that's a lot because it's 10% of Russian oil output. And if you look at the United States, the force behind the shale gas revolution, the shale oil development in the States, it was small and medium companies. So, and this is one of the dilemmas of the government, and the way it looks at the moment is that they actually planning to introduce certain measures next year. There was a special law on which was prepared by the government of Khanty-Mansi Autonomous Okrug to develop, boost the role of small and medium companies in that region, because again, because of the declining production, the governments of resource-rich regions are concerned about what to do with sort of social stability. If companies start closing their wells, start closing some of their enterprises, and the only solution to that, according to the Khanty-Mansi government, is the creation of a number of small and medium companies that can boost output from brownfields, that can apply technical approaches to Russian oil production. But again, this is interesting story, because if you look, for example, at Tatarstan, because Tatarstan had great powers, managed to secure great powers in the 90s when it comes to domestic economic development. They themselves are doing really well. The oil companies, the small and medium companies, are responsible for over 20% of the regional oil output. And of course, if in Russia, small and medium companies will be responsible for 20% of national output, that would be great. And this is the argument, for example, of experts, of many Russian experts, and also a number now of international experts, is that the government really needs to focus on, partnership with IOCs is good, but that's mainly for challenging development, of new geological fields, such as Bajenova formation, which will be developed by partnership between Gazprom and BP and Rosneft partnership with Statoil and with Exxon. And also, the development of the Arctic and the Siberian, basically, yes, it's great to do it on the basis of partnership between Russian national oil company Rosneft and IOCs, but with some participation of private companies. But at the end of the day, the true solution to Russian declining oil output is the development of small and medium companies. But again, this goes to the ideological debate which has always been taking place in the Russian government between sort of the sort of liberal economists and the more conservative pro-government officials. Is Russian oil industry, is it a hindrance to Russian modernization, economic modernization, or it can be a vehicle for Russia's economic modernization? I personally think that it could potentially become a vehicle under certain circumstances, because all this talk about developing of innovative technologies at Skolkovo and sort of diversifying the economy, the government officials have been talking about this for the past 20 years. They have not diversified the economy. New technologies is just how can I put it diplomatically? Well, it's not really there. So it's all just big talk. So, but at the same time, if the oil industry with the technology transfer, with the spillover effect, can play a very important role in the sort of the development and modernization of Russian economy. And another issue here is which role does Russia want to play in the global economy? Does it want to be service economy, or as sort of some Russian politicians call it, the sort of the what is this appendage, the придаткa, the resource appendage to China or to Europe. But the Kazakhs created a very good term for it. They call it service economy to big powers. I think it's not. It's a much better term diplomatically. So whether Russia wants to be a service economy to Europe or to Asia Pacific, or whether it wants to compete with a sort of technologically when it comes to the development of innovative technologies with Silicon Valley, with the United States, with India, with China now. I think that the political institutions in Russia and potential political instability are not very conducive to the development of sort of a huge innovative cluster, but also in terms of corruption, high levels of corruption as well are not very basically a main hindrance when it comes to the development of new technologies. So I will end here. This is our forthcoming paper. Of course, I only touched upon some of the issues. I could not really cover everything, because we cover everything. We cover the financial markets, we cover the issue of geological base, we cover the fiscal issues, we cover political issues, and in a way, this study is sort of a prequel to my book, which is coming out next year, called The Battle for Russian Oil, and it looks exactly at the main forces which were involved in the management of the oil industry in Russia from the sort of late 80s, early 90s up to the present day. I just need to now update the final chapter and incorporate all the latest sort of changes and try to provide some kind of forecast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shamil. Yeah, well, please ask questions. Well, let me ask the first question then. Just your opinion. So, do you understand correctly that putting Khodorkovsky behind the bars made sense because of tax reasons, development of the tax?
No, I think it had to do with this was one of the reasons, but the way we're trying to explain this is that when you're trying to create a system which is manageable, a fiscal system which is manageable, but also, of course, there were political reasons. There was, I think, Richard Sackler wrote a book which unfortunately was withdrawn from all the bookshops because it was threatened. He was threatened with a lawsuit, and he's got about 40 reasons, I think, for the demise of Khodorkovsky, and just the number is I think says a lot. I think I would call it the alignment of unlucky stars when it comes to the Khodorkovsky demise. This was just one of the reasons. I mean, of course, the one reason is that because he became so politically powerful, and again, this is. I may not say it accurately, but when he had a meeting with Gref, it was reported in the press. He basically said, "Well, I control the parliament. I can do whatever I want. Who are you?" You know. So this is a kind of. He became too ambitious. I think politically, he may wanted something better for the country, but I think. At the same time, I think that the fact that UCAS was going to be in the hands of a foreign company, I think this is which was a serious threat that the government will lose sort of its role in the oil industry, and the oil industry will basically be controlled by Western powers, and this would not really go well politically in Russia in the long run. And of course, Khodorkovsky was made a case of they needed an example to show to other politically active oligarchs, because I mean, if you look at all the Russian politically active oligarchs, they're either behind bars or they're in London, or somewhere else. Berezovsky, look what happened to Berezovsky, to what happened to Gusinsky, and I think it was. But the interesting thing is that Khodorkovsky was also against production sharing agreements, which was the basis of IUC involvement in Russia in the 90s. He was the one who advanced the idea that if international oil companies want to get involved in Russian oil production, forget about PSAs. If you want part of the game, buy a stake in our company. And this is exactly which is being done now with Rosneft as well. It's the same kind of arrangement, because I think what Sechin did is I think he's a very intelligent man, because he took some ideas from Shafranik from the 90s. He took some ideas from Khodorkovsky. He took some ideas from national oil companies, in Norway, in other countries, and also. Looked at the weaknesses of some of IOCs, for example, such as BP, because BP was obviously in quite a weakened position after the Gulf of Mexico disaster, but also this constant stalemate when it comes to the relationship with the AIA consortium. I wrote a piece about this called "BP Russian Billionaires and the Kremlin: A Power Triangle That Never Was," which was published in November last year, which looks at a number of these issues, in greater detail. But of course, when Putin was asked at the Valdai meeting about the reason for Rosneft, the way he presented it, in some ways is accurate, because BP came to Russian government and said, "This relationship with AIA is not working. We really want to get have a working relationship with Rosneft," and so the idea was there to. I think Putin realized that he will satisfy all the people, both in the government, but also when it comes to BP, in the government, his argument was that, okay, BP is now getting stake in Rosneft, it's privatization. At the same time, Rosneft retains its role, it's going global now. So I'm satisfying also the pro-state, the conservative agenda. So just with this one move, he satisfied both camps. Within his sort of inner circle, and but Khodorkovsky is obviously it's a story of sort of political resistance. It's a story of who is actually in charge of Russia, and I think that the fact that as well that there was this sort of rumor that Khodorkovsky wanted Russia to create turn it into parliamentary democracy. And they needed to strike quite quickly because, with the Khodorkovsky affair as well, because this was just before the Russian parliamentary elections. And one of the arguments which was used by Siloviki when they said to Putin, they said, if we delay, if we wait longer, then UKAS will take control over the parliament again, and we will not be able to to do anything. And so like I said, it was an alignment of unlucky stars for UKAS. And UKAS was one of the companies which also wanted to build private pipelines within Russia. So it's a question, of course, it's a question of one. I would put it this way: when it comes to Russian oil industry, when Westerners look at Russian oil industry, or just overall the way Russian economy operates, if you look at private companies and you look at state-owned companies, often private companies are operating in the interests of the state, and state-controlled companies are often operated in the interests of private individuals. So it's quite difficult to understand Russia in some ways. When people say, this is a private entity, actually it's not, because you get a phone call from some guy in high positions of power and says, I want money for this project. You need to cough up money for another project. You need to support the hockey team. You need to, we are planning to build a new Silicon Valley. You need to cough up some money, So it's very different to the way Western economic world operates. Like I said, when it comes to state-controlled companies, often they're the easiest way to boost one's, or sort of facilitate one's personal interests. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your very interesting stimulating presentation. My question refers to the role of Russia's regions.
Mm-hmm.
Not only regions dominated by Russia, but by national republics. What role they play today in oil business in Kazakhstan, Chechnya, and some other places? You said that's one of the reasons why the government fought fiercely against small and medium-sized enterprises was willingness to surrender to separatism, etc. So separatism, regionalism, and willingness to what's
Yeah, well, the big chunk of my book deals with this issue because there is one chapter which is entitled "Power Comes with the Territory," and it looks at how certain regions had more power, both economically and politically, simply because they could use the so-called the nationalist trump card. There will be, I think, I had to be quite careful with this book, I think, because there will be a number of revelations when it comes to how the different oil sort of groups promoted their political interests. When it comes to Bashkortostan, for example, when the new parliament was elected in the 90s, the MPs received video record players from the local oil directors because they made the right voting, they pushed the right button when it comes to sort of proclamation of state sovereignty of Bashkortostan. And also when I interviewed some of the leaders of nationalist movement, they were financially boosted and they were used when they organized these big rallies, nationalist rallies in capitals, in Kazan and Ufa in particular. The idea was to scare Moscow into giving more powers to those regions, and they succeeded quite well. I have a table why certain regions, which decisions they took, and what powers they actually got from the federal government. When it comes to Tatarstan and Bashkortostan, it's the only two regions that have stake in Transneft. They have stake in one of the two subsidiaries of Transneft. They are the only two regions that had privatization on their own right. they stopped Yeltsin's privatization decree of November '92, as you know, and they said, well, actually, this is Russia. We are independent now. We're sovereign states within Russia. Yes, but we have our own presidents. So you guys, you just deal with other issues, and this belongs to people of our region. But the thing is that they played quite well the nationalist card, because they both used the ethnic sort of issues, like the sort of oppression by the Russians of Bashkirs and Tatars. But at the same time, they because there is such a large community of other groups, particularly Russians in those regions, they also promoted the idea of, I remember in Bashkortostan, because I come from that region, originally I come from Ufa, the idea that the rallies was, we'll turn Bashkortostan into second Kuwait. So this was basically, of course, people, and when people came to referendum to vote for state sovereignty of those regions, they all voted yes, because they said, why should we give this to Moscow? Moscow is getting all our money, and at least we'll have very happy life here and stuff like this. So, so in that respect, the elites quite skillfully used they mobilized masses for their cause. But at the end of the day, the idea was to take control over those assets. So when it comes to Bashkortostan and Tatarstan, taxation, licensing. By the way, the two-key system didn't work there, because they said, this is our decision, we're making decisions when it comes to licensing ourselves. Then they started changing. Taxes they didn't pay for several years. They retained all the taxes in the regions. They didn't send anything to Moscow. So privatization, infrastructure, even domestic petroleum market was controlled by Bashneft and Tatneft in those regions. But that started changing towards the end 90s because of both regions are landlocked, of course. But another reason is that because of the type of oil that they have, as you know, it's high sulfur content, heavy oil, and one of the reasons why Bashkortostan and Tatarstan always fought for securing access to Transnistria system is because this is basically the Urals blend. You mixed high qualities West Siberian oil with oil from Bashkortostan and Tatarstan, which is heavy oil with high sulfur content, and you benefit financially, because if you try to sell that oil directly, it will be quite problematic, I think, to sell that oil in international markets. But this started changing as well in terms of when the government or oil companies promoted the idea of oil quality bank. As you know, when they were talking about that the companies that produce poor quality oil will have to compensate to the guys who produce high quality oil. And again, Bashkortostan and Tatarstan were objecting that. But this was the breaking point for them. This is when they started giving up their powers, because they realized that if this oil quality bank was introduced, actually one of the deputy speakers of Bashkortostan parliament said that and had an informal discussion in the Russian presidential administration. They basically told them, guys, if you don't give up your powers, if you don't start transferring taxes to the federal government, we'll introduce the oil quality bank. We'll make you bankrupt. You'll go bankrupt within 6 months after the introduction of this oil quality bank. So they had no other reason, no other choice but to give up their powers. But also, apart from that, in Bashkortostan, the federal government, because you know that in Tatarstan they retain control over Tatneft. In Bashkortostan it was a different story, because in Bashkortostan, again, there is a chapter of my book dealing with the elections of 2003 in Bashkortostan, when the federal sort of elites promoted the participation of one of former managers of Lukoil, Ralif Safin, and one of the former owners of Meshprombank, Sergei Veremenko, to undermine Rakhimov. And it's interesting because they used everything, and Rakhimov really lost the elections. And then Rakhimov had to go and beg, went to the Kremlin and begged, and I'm going to do whatever you want. And then as a result, Uralsib, Bashkreditbank, was sold to Lukoil control company, Nikoil, which is no longer regional bank, as you know, Uralsib. You'll see it everywhere now. And whereas Bashneft was sold to AFK Sistema, Yevtushenkov's company. So that changed, but Tatarstan, of course, is still playing a very important role. I think in some ways Tatarstan was left to its own devices as long as they in some ways they retain a lot of powers, but at the same time I think because the elites, they are quite proactive and modern thinking, unlike some other regions, particularly around the red belt in Russia, very conservative. I think that even if you compare the way the Bashkortostan and Tatarstan attracted investments, in 10 years' time, Bashkortostan attracted the same amount of investments as Tatarstan did in just 1 year. It's just the way that institutions, the institutional design, and the way the elites sort of view how they should develop a region really matters. Now, if we're talking about the contemporary period, I think that Bashkortostan, of course, I mean, it's really the story that is finished because Bashneft is now a private company owned by, like I said, AFK Sistema. Potentially, it will be an interesting company when they merge with Rusneft, Gutseriev's company, because Rusneft, Gutseriev's company, is based on. He basically brought together some small and medium companies with interesting assets, and created this Rusneft. Actually, this is some potentially would be an interesting structure for some of vertically integrated oil companies in Russia if they use this kind of small and medium companies under their control. Some of them are already doing it. There is a number of sort of joint ventures with the participation of even companies such as Rosneft, Gazpromneft, and so on and so forth, which are operating in sort of small and medium segment. So I personally see the future, and also the one of Russian ministers said that they're planning to introduce next year special measures to develop small and medium companies in Russia. And like I said before, there was a law prepared by Khanty-Mansi government a few years ago, and there was even a big conference, as you remember, on that subject. Unfortunately, even local United Russia said, we'll promote this, but then I think either for political reasons or just because there were some other priorities, it was shelved. But let's see whether next year the government will introduce those measures. But the problem again with small and medium companies, something I didn't mention, is theft. Theft of oil from the Transneft system. This particularly been prominent. There are two regions in Russia that have this problem. It's Dagestan and Samara region. It happens in other regions, but these were the how can I put it, the ones who came at the top of the list. And Transneft, even they wrote a letter to the president of Dagestan asking him to deal with this issue, because the thieves started using very sophisticated technology, actually investing millions of dollars into building this. One pipeline was running about 60 kilometers from the main Transneft pipeline, and was hidden in a way that it was not possible to identify it. They even managed to maintain pressure within a normal sort of level within the Transneft system, so you would not be able to identify that there was theft. So the thieves are becoming, sophisticated, and there was even the head of Transneft even said once. He said it's a joke because in some weddings in Dagestan, the new couple gets presents, and they're presented with this sort of stolen oil sort of pipeline. So this is obviously not acceptable. And then these companies, some of the small and medium companies, you basically, what you do is that you create a small and medium company, then you buy a license for some small well. You only get about 2 buckets a year from that well, but then you steal oil and then you sell it back to Transneft. And it's been a serious problem, but they're introducing a new system, nefti control, oil control, next year, which will deal with this. I think even later this year, which will they're applying very sophisticated technical approaches which will identify where this oil comes from, and they will know from basically everything about that oil from the well up to this sort of the Transneft system. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. I would like to ask a question. What do you think about the role of Rosneft, of course, the Russian oil markets, and to latest concluded deals with British Petroleum and Exxon? How do you think will this increase the role of Russian international oil markets, in particular in a sense of affecting prices, probably?
When it comes to oil markets, no, not really. In terms of gas markets, potentially yes. Like I said earlier, the argument that independent gas producers and Rosneft is now using is that we need to focus on supplying more gas, not really be concerned about maintaining high gas prices in Europe. And I think there will be more pressure on Gazprom to start delinking its gas prices from oil prices, because there is usually a delay of about 6 to 9 months between the how oil price changes and the gas price of Gazprom changes. So in that respect, yes, but oil, because simply our institute has just published a book which actually came out on the 1st of November, yesterday, edited by Jonathan Stern, on whether the world is moving towards global gas market and global gas price, because at the moment gas markets are not really united. You have it's quite quite diverse. I may even have here a presentation which I gave here, and this is something which may be interesting to you to have a look at. Sorry, yeah. So in terms of the prices, of course, LNG. I mean, you'll see that even when it comes to LNG, the diversity of prices is staggering, and of course at the end of the day, I think it's just the argument. I think the main argument in that book, I have not seen it, but I think the main argument is that that Gazprom will come under a lot of pressure in the future, not only externally but also domestically, when it comes to the price regimes and price formulas it uses. So, and because Rosneft is now moving into gas market, even with this Siberian development, it's now getting some very interesting projects from TNK BP. So it's going to be a very serious force in the gas sector in the next few years. I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next couple of years, but it may take longer. But because now oil companies are moving into gas sector, Gazprom is trying to move into the oil sector as well. Now they're promoting shale oil development in Bazhenova formation with Shell. They want to focus on not shale gas but shale oil, and I think that I see that there will be problems because Gazprom does not have this in terms of dynamics of relationship with international players, international companies. Gazprom cannot really compete with Rosneft. Rosneft has now built ties with all the key players, on the international markets. It's got Exxon, it's got BP, it's got Eni, it's got Statoil. So they all have their own strengths when it comes to technology, when it comes to development of offshore, Arctic offshore projects, particularly. Actually, all of them do, but particularly Statoil and Exxon have very, very strong, experience in that respect. So they, but when it comes to trading, yes, it's interesting because BP will provide Rosneft with access to its trading arm, and then. In a way, I think one of the arguments in our paper is that now Sechin he's competing now with Timchenko, with Gunvor, and this is one of the reasons why Gunvor has lost some of its tenders, because Rosneft is now, with the help of BP, is going to replace and start becoming a very active oil trader. But oil markets, they're not driven by Gazprom. They're not driven by Rosneft. They're driven by Wall Street and OPEC. Russia at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who produces oil in Russia. Russia is a free rider. It's just on a bandwagon of the way oil contracts are traded, and the availability of oil on the market is really. The people who really can supply more oil or decrease oil supply is OPEC, not Russia. So, yeah.
Yes, sorry, just brief mention. Today the news came that Rosneft concluded a deal with Interral EX on supplying their power plants with gas since 2016.
Yes, yeah. This is also we cover also electricity sector, because the electricity sector, the reform of the electricity sector has failed. I mean, everybody recognizes this. And Sechin is quite successfully using it and saying, "Oh, these liberals, look at them, they failed. It's my turn now. Let me give, it's my toy. I'm going to play now with this toy." So so this is exactly what's happening. And I think that one of the ideas for privatization of Rosneft by the liberal camp was to displace. Because the thing about Russian elites is that their power bases are concentrated around corporate assets. Okay, and this is another argument of the paper, is that the fact that the liberals wanted to privatize Rosneft was to undermine Sechin's corporate institutional base. Okay, and they failed. So it's very interesting dynamics. I think it will be quite fascinating. Particularly the forthcoming battle between Gazprom and Rosneft in the next few years. And I think, to me, it looks like Gazprom is going to lose that battle, because it's got too many competitors now emerging. And here is I think, another interesting aspect is that there could be potentially partnerships between Sechin and Timchenko against Gazprom. In terms of changing the way it does its business.
They replaced
Both in Russia and so in the oil sector, they are competitors. In the gas sector, Rosneft and Timchenko are potentially allies. So.
This particular question is the partner for Interral was Novatek previously, not
Yeah. The problem is, I think one of the problems when you read sometimes media reports, even in leading international newspapers, is that people look at some story and they don't present it often accurately, simply because when it comes to Russian, the politics of the Russian energy sector, not just oil, gas, you need to look at everything, different aspects, as you rightly put it. People are playing not one chess game, but 7 chess games sometimes at the same time. And if you think, oh, this guy lost that game, actually, no, he's not lost that game. He lost that game, but he's going to win another one. So, you have to have the big picture. And it's quite difficult often for people to see the big picture, to see what's actually happening, why certain moves are being made. It's not an easy task, because you need to look at a lot of the factors, factions institutional constraints, economic constraints, legal constraints, you know. Thank you.
More questions?
Yes, there is one question there. So you're talking about, sorry, you're sitting quite far away. So your question, your first question is about the petroleum products displacing crude oil. Yeah? And the second question was what about?
About factoring about the commodities,
Gas to liquids?
Yes.
GTL?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the first I think that, as you know, the idea of the government is, or at least of President Putin, is to basically display. In a way, you're right. You know, the idea is to export high-end petroleum products instead of crude oil. But and some of the tax incentives which were introduced over the past couple of years were seeking to boost that. But I think that it's still for oil companies it's still easier just to export crude oil. And again, this is something. This is again the argument of Rosneft is that Rosneft can change that as a serious new player, not new player, but sort of an enhanced player or player with enhanced powers in the Russian oil industry to change those dynamics. When it comes to all these fuels that you mentioned, some of the refineries in Europe and in China as well, I think potentially could have problems because they relied on this sort of low quality refined products, particularly mazut. You saw this. I know traders in Switzerland. They're all sort of selling M25, M100, all these different types of mazut, and there was a lot of demand for bunker fuels in particular, and because it was easier, any sort of bitumen plant in Russia was able to produce this sort of very low quality products without much investment, because they had all this sort of old facilities, and then they would ship these fuels. And I think the idea that as you know, this sort of samovar as well, this sort of the kind of illegal sort of small refining plants. So the idea is to create some kind of not only transparency within the Russian refining industry, but also to create incentives so that the companies will be interested in modernizing the refinery, because most of the Russian refineries were built in the 40s and 70s. I mean, a lot of them has been upgraded, and Bashkortostan in particular, actually, they've done a lot of work in upgrading their refineries. But at the end of the day, I think companies still there is a feeling now those tax breaks which were introduced were not really adequate, and the next measures need to be done in order to promote the development of the refining industry in Russia, because companies are now asking for delay. You know, some of them, Surgutneftegas wrote letter to the government saying, "Oh, can we actually delay this because we were running out of time. We don't have time. We were focusing on other issues. We need to change our investment strategy and this kind of stuff." So again, this is where Rosneft comes in. When it comes to so I see the future, yes, for that, but it's going to take a few years. GTL, I know that Gazprom is now, how can I put it, in boosting the department, the number of, they're recruiting more people to deal with those issues. And there was even one lady who wrote to our institute saying that she wants to come and write a working paper on GTL in Russia. So it's of course it's very new, and it's not new. It's not a new idea, but I think everybody's getting very excited about it now. But the question is whether the government will create incentives, and whether this is or whether this is a way for domestic producers in Russia to diversify, in a way, their exposure in terms of what they actually supply to the market. And this is a dilemma, exactly the same dilemma in other gas-producing countries, particularly countries which produce both large quantities of oil and large quantities of gas, such as, for example, Kazakhstan, where they've been talking about using gas as a feedstock for the petrochemical industry, for the chemical industry. And again, at the end of the day, it's the question of the added value. Added value and diversification of your markets. And this is something which is related to the issue of the gas game, the global gas game, how it's going to change. Because in terms of the United States, a lot of the decisions which they're going to take, or a lot of the stuff in the gas sector in the world globally, not just in North America, depends on the decisions of the next American administration, is whether to ship gas, start exporting gas, or whether to use that gas as a cheap feedstock for its chemical industry, or use it as a competitive advantage for not just chemical industry, but also other industries. I personally think it will be both, that they will both export and also use it domestically to satisfy all the interested parties. But of course, people now in Russia realize that the gas game is moving very, very fast, and now we need to go into the added value products. We need to look at how not only retain our role in the traditional sort of segment in the gas markets, but also how to create sort of new niche, or occupy a new niche in both domestically and externally. So there is future. They're all looking at this. It's just a question of how quickly can they do this. I personally think that independent companies are probably better equipped because they're much faster when it comes to moving. I mean, look at the development of Stockmann. That's one of the problems and arguments of, for example, government liberals, is that they're saying that state-controlled companies are not as efficient as private companies. Private companies can act very quickly when it comes to certain change in the global markets. Whereas for Gazprom it took years and years of discussions about what we're going to do with Stockmann, and then shale gas revolution happened. In a way, it's good that it happened. Then they didn't actually start developing Stockmann, because now it would have been even worse, the exposure. But the answer to your question is yes, in short, and I just tried to present the sort of discussions and debates which are happening now within the gas community and the oil community. And another problem, not problem, but another sort of issue when it comes to the difficulty of understanding the sort of political drivers. Because a lot of the decisions to the gas sector, both in Russia and, like I said, in the United States, will be driven by domestic political considerations. And that's something that is something quite difficult often to understand for people, because you have to look at different games, being played at the same time.
Sorry for interrupting you. We're actually
We're running out.
just to continue the discussion privately. We need to go to the lectures.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much for listening to talk and answers to the questions. So, thanks.
Thank you. Well, thank you for good questions. You always say that you can judge the audience by the quality of the questions.